In 2008, when the Yamaha WR250R entered the dual sport market, there was nothing like it available. It was a 250 cc's revolution. It was a fuel-injected, liquid-cooled, dual overhead cam single-cylinder engine with high-lift camshafts, large titanium intake valves, and a forged piston pushing a high compression ratio. All of this squeezed into a semi-double cradle aluminum frame and a fully adjustable suspension with 10.6 inches of travel, front and back. It was a fancy dual sport machine. Nothing like that was available at the 250cc size in those years. The result was a machine with sufficient power to cruise on a highway at 60 miles per hour with a top speed of around 80 miles per hour and practically no vibration from the motor, especially considering it is a single-cylinder machine. At the same time, it's slightly less than 300 pounds of ready-to-ride weight, with the more than 10 inches of suspension travel, made it good enough to keep up with the more aggressive dirt-oriented bikes on the trail. The engine produces about 30 horsepower at 10,000 RPM and a maximum torque of 17.5 foot-pounds at 8,000 RPM. The numbers are not huge, and things happen at high RPM levels, but it was top of the range for a 250cc motor, and it benefited from a nicely spread 6-speed gearbox. If you wanted something similar around 2008 here in the United States, you had to go up in size and weight. Some options, notably the Suzuki 400 DRZ, a little bit heavier, or there was the 650 lineup of bikes, which included the Honda XR650, the Suzuki DR650, the BMW F650 GS, or the KLR 650. The WR250R went head-to-head with these larger machines, obviously not as good as them on the road, but still, and it was potentially better than them on the trails. The conclusion of many riders and reviewers during those days was that the WR250R was punching above its weight. It became really popular very quickly. On the ADV Rider forum, the WR thread was one of the longest. It didn't take long for the WR to catch my attention in those days. In this video, I'll talk about how this motorcycle came to me. Then I'll describe its history within Yamaha and its history in my motorcycle shed. Next, I'll talk about my perception of what is the bad and the good about this bike. And then I'll tell you what my plans are for it. I'll end the video with a selection of videos of my most recent rides with the WR in the Death Valley. My first motorcycle was an early 80s Honda XL250, and I remember how much I loved that machine, but also how I wanted more power from it. From my point of view, at that time, all I wanted was the same Honda XL, but with an engine upgrade, something like the XL350. Then I went to college, I sold the XL250, then I went to graduate school in Ohio, I started a career, got into cars and forgot about motorcycles. 18 years later, I moved to Oregon for work, but also to start riding again. As soon as I was able to get a house and a garage, I purchased a F650 GS, and it had to be the Dakar, of course. That was March of 2006. I started to discover Oregon via motorcycle. This map and the F650 GS were great partners for that. 3 months later, I had my first experience in the playas of Southeast Oregon. Thanks, Dave. And as much as the F650 GS Dakar was fun, I missed a lighter bike after all. Well, the F650 GS is a great machine, but to me it became kinda not here, not there, when in 2008 the BMW F800 GS was launched. Envy of the bigger parallel twin machines ensued. But I also felt the need for something smaller, nimbler, more trail-ready. A two-motorcycle solution came to my mind, and from this lame excuse, an addiction was about to be born. Yamaha's WR250R seemed to be the perfect, lighter, smaller machine. It was not a 250cc of 25 years past. And when 2009 came along, the real estate bubble burst. This machine was sitting at the local dealer with a take-me-home price tag. I had to get it. And I still have it today, 14 years later, with a lot of scars, which are character enhancers for the bike and for me. During the 12 years this motorcycle was in production, Yamaha never offered any significant upgrades to it. Just bold new graphics, or not even that. The motorcycle was basically the same from 2008 when it launched to 2020 when it was finally dropped by Yamaha. But it was still punching above its weight in 2020, although it was more expensive than its competitors of same size from Kawasaki and Honda. Killing the WR250R was a long, slow process, riddled with speculation in the forums, until the final word had finally taken hold when Yamaha claimed global production efficiencies to pull the plug on this wonderful motorcycle. I translate global production efficiencies as small profit margins. Yamaha has a large lineup of products bringing more revenue than the WR, I'm sure. And then there are the emissions thing. I would say any improvements to this bike to comply with new legislation would not be worth the investment. It became a dismissed icon. But there are still hopes that now, with new products from Honda and Kawasaki in the 300cc level, that Yamaha may bring back the WR as a WR300R, or a rally version, or a mini Tenere. A WR450R rings good for me, but for now, 3 years later, all we know is that the WR250R is gone. But who am I to blame Yamaha for pulling the plug on this machine if today I barely ride mine? When I got this bike in 2009, I rode it everywhere. The F650 GS became the forgotten machine. I would load the WR with camping gear and take it on long rides, including riding it on my own version of the Oregon Discovery route, using the old Oregon backcountry Discovery maps. That was about a 1,000-mile ride on mostly dirt roads. By the way, there is finally a new, should we call it modern, version of the BDR for Oregon, and sections 1 and 2 of the route seem to go through roads that the WR is very familiar with. And I can see there is Dave Walk's touch on it, like Domingo Pass, Rincon Flat, Hawks Valley, Shiprock Road, Fandango Canyon, roads my WR250R and I rode across the state a few times, going to my favorite riding spots in southeast Oregon, where I would camp and then ride on several loops in that area, some of them now part of the new Oregon Backcountry Discovery route. In March of 2011, I went with a friend to the Death Valley. We loaded our bikes on a truck, and the WR took me on my first adventure rides in the Death Valley. Since then, I've been to the Death Valley in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 21, and 22, and the WR has always been there with me. In July of 2011, I finally got my multi-cylinder adventure machine. Instead of the BMW F800 GS, I got a 2012 Triumph Tiger 800 XC, and I'll make a video about this motorcycle as well. Soon after I got the Tiger, I sold my BMW 650 GS and bought a Ducati Street Fighter. That's when my addiction escalated, priorities changed in my riding habits. I matured into a schmuck. I became a snobbish rider. Since then, more motorcycles were adopted, and the only times I've ridden my WR have been in the Death Valley, when I ride it only on the rough terrain rides, roads where I cower to take my fancy machines. 2021 was the worst year yet. I took the WR to the Death Valley with me, and then I did not even ride it. Although it's mostly forgotten, hidden in a corner of my motorcycle shed, and it is surrounded by a lot of bling and horsepower, it still holds its ground. And I still had a lot of fun with it in March of 2022 when I rode with it in the Chloride Hills in the Death Valley. It still rides like when it was new, and despite not riding it much, I still have fun when I ride it. Although the WR is a great machine, it has its shortfalls. It's no unicorn. One thing is that it has this 2-gallon tank that's good enough for 130 miles, give or take. Well, more take and less give. But that was easily solved by aftermarket developers. I actually only upgraded my tank in 2021, and only because the original tank rusted out. Up until then, I carried an extra gallon or two when traversing areas with more than 100 miles with no service. I never ran out of gasoline, even on the most remote areas. I would simply stop, add fuel, and continue. An extra gallon and a half would guarantee about 180 miles, which covers almost 100% of all riding places in the lower 48 states. Now, with the new tank and an extra gallon, I can ride more than 200 miles with the bike. The other problem is that it has small torque figures and the power only comes really at higher RPMs. Not very good for riding uphill on technical terrain unless you have the skills to go fast on this stuff, which is not my case. On those first years of this bike, while people on forums were, off the bat, begging Yamaha to bring a larger displacement version of the WR, which landed on deaf ears as we know, developers created a 300cc kit for it. But the most common and cheap strategy to solve this problem was to go to a smaller front sprocket. One tooth was enough to allow the motor to offer better crawling speeds at lower RPM and offering a stronger second gear. Mine is still on its original sprocket set. Maybe when it's time for a new chain, I'll consider a change. Reliability issues, well, not really, but there were fuel pump related issues. The first time was a recall in this area, and later I had 2 fuel pumps fail. The first fuel pump problem started in the middle of nowhere when I was riding in the Mango Pass in the Death Valley, and once I would turn the bike off, it would not restart, letting it cool down or settle, and it would start again, and it made it back to the home base. The second fuel pump disintegrated itself with rust when the tank rusted out after not riding the WR for 2 years in a row, when in 2020 I skipped my annual trip to the Death Valley, and in 2021 I took it there but did not ride it. This problem gave me the opportunity to buy an aftermarket larger tank, which was a breeze to install. And now, as I mentioned before, I no longer need to carry an extra gallon, but if I do, I have a 200 plus mile range. What else? I guess it could have better suspension. Any motorcycle could have better suspension. In the case of the WR, I think it's good enough. It also has a very weak headlight. And then I added 2 very cheap made in you-know-where auxiliary lights, which cost me less than $50 for the pair, which is a perfect match for the machine. And it's very useful after I learned my Death Valley friends have the habit of ending rides late at night. I actually like riding on dirt roads at night. Anyway, let's talk about the good stuff. I like its size, its weight, and its overall performance for what it is. For the price I paid it when I bought it new, it has paid itself off many times over in these 14 years of ownership. Although the suspension could be better, it's fully adjustable and has great travel front and back, and the bike has great ground clearance. It handles really well on dirt and on pavement. I like that I can travel with it at speed with no problems cruising at 60 miles or even 70 miles per hour. It punched above its weight 15 years ago when it was launched, and for its purpose it still does it today, in my opinion. If I can't keep up with my friends, I'm sure it's not because of any shortcomings this machine might have, it's the rider. My WR250R has been through hell and back several times. It carries the battle scars very well. It has been on an end-over-end crash on another Mango Pass excursion. Sorry, no video of it. And it still took me back to the home base. The bent parts tell the story. The headlight and the plastic housing for the light broke on this crash, which led me to finally upgrade its headlight. The cheap auxiliary lights survived that crash, by the way. The WR250R has crashed or been down several other times. It's very easy to pick it up from the ground, and it's always ready for more action. Besides the bent parts I had to replace, it collected many scars along the way, but the engine case remains basically untouched from all these crashes. The essential stuff is well protected without the need of any crash bars. It just needs a bash plate and good hand guards. Maintenance. That's another advantage of this machine. I basically change the oil and filter every year, and I lube the chain every 200 miles or so, and I clean and re-oil the air filter every now and then. Valve checks? No worries. Titanium intake valves and other quality materials in its dual overhead cam valve train shows where Yamaha invested to make this motor durable. The interval for checking and adjusting valve clearance is 26,000 miles. It's a strong machine, but don't let my opinion and experience be the only source of information on this. Check the videos of Riding with Tom. He just issued a series of videos when he crossed Australia with his WR250R, loaded with camping gear, keeping up with larger bikes. He is a motorcycle abuser. If there ever was a motorcycle protection agency, he would have been indicted already. His WR250R is a testimony of the strength of this machine. Cheers, Tom.
Holy moly.
Well, I don't know what else to say, except that 14 years later, despite all the abuse, my WR250R still starts and rides like when it was new. Today, 2023, there are other options out there in this segment. Like I mentioned earlier, Honda has come up with a 300cc lineup of motorcycles, and my friends ride KTMs and Husqvarnas. I've been tempted many times to sell my WR250R and get one of them fancy KTMs or Husqvarnas, a 350 or 500. But in my mind, at the end of the day, the price of those bikes, $12,000, do not justify this purchase. I only ride the smaller bikes a couple of times a year, and the WR performs well enough for me to keep up with my friends. After all, roads and tracks giving me a choice, I prefer riding the bigger adventure machines. My thinking as of now is that if I sell the WR250R, It will be for a bike that will be adventure styled and lighter than my CB500X, something I could take on my Death Valley rides like the KTM 390 Adventure, which is a lot more price competitive. But for now, the WR250R is here to stay in its little spot in my motorcycle shed, and it's always ready to go for a ride. Well, that's all, folks. Enjoy some video footage of my WR250R in action in the scenic Death Valley. And thank you for watching.
Hey, what time is dinner?